This morning entitled, "Do Something, Mr. McConnell." When the Senate returns from its Labor Day recess, it must act on guns. The editorial includes the names of mass shooting victims from incidents such as Columbine, Sandy Hook, last month's shooting in Dayton and El Paso, and many, many more. The editorial board writes in part, what if there was a mass shooting in the United States not once or twice or 4 or 6 times monthly, but every single day, a big one, the kind that electrifies social media and squats for days on page one? Would that be enough to move Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell from his insistent inertia on gun safety? Would any volume of bloodshed convince the Kentucky Republican that Congress faces a moral imperative to act? 38 people were slain in 3 such shootings in August in Dayton, Ohio, and El Paso, as well as West Texas. And still, Senate Republicans and President Trump refuse to act. Mitch McConnell says he is open to do something, but is waiting for the White House.
We're in a discussion about what to do on the gun issue in the wake of these horrendous shootings. I said several weeks ago that if the president took a position on a bill so that we knew we would actually be making a law and not just having serial votes, I'd be happy to put it on the floor. And the administration is in the process of studying what they're prepared to support, if anything. And I expect to get an answer to that next week.
Well, I mean, that's what Moscow Mitch says. But I mean, you look at this guy's legacy, and it's going to be 2 things. I think right now, Richard Haass, he's going to have the legacy of basically doing the work of Vladimir Putin, an ex-KGB agent, and Russia, who Mitch McConnell's been told by the FBI, the CIA, the Director of National Intelligence, the United States military, he's been told by everybody that Russia is trying to interfere and disrupt our democratic process, that we are under attack. And so Mitch McConnell is killing Republican bills like Marco Rubio's and Democratic bills that would protect the homeland from this attack from Russia. And Moscow Mitch is doing nothing about it, but he's killing every bill, including Marco Rubio's bill that simply says if we catch somebody interfering with American democracy, we will put sanctions on them. Moscow Mitch killed that bill too. Moscow Mitch has killed every single bill that the intel community has said will protect America. So that's his legacy, not protecting us from enemies foreign. And what about his legacy protecting us from domestic enemies? People that would shoot children, first graders, the Friday before they go home for Christmas holiday with AR-15s, or people that would shoot wildly from their car in Odessa, Texas, and shoot 17-month-old babies in the back seat of their cars, or would shoot up people going to worship Jesus in Texas churches, to do nothing about it, or shoot up people going to Walmart for back-to-school shopping. But Mitch McConnell, just like Moscow Mitch, won't do anything in protecting us from foreign enemies. He has been the one person that has killed every one of these bills to protect us from our domestic enemies that are gunning down our children every day. What's his end game? What's his legacy? Where does it end? Who supports Moscow Mitch doing Vladimir Putin's bidding and killing Republican bills to secure the homeland against Russian interference that Donald Trump's FBI director, CIA director, Director of National Intelligence, and military intel have all told Moscow Mitch, Russia is invading this country and we need to protect the homeland. Even Kirstjen Nielsen, when she was the head of the Department of Homeland Security, said, this is a threat to American democracy. He does nothing against our foreign enemies. He does nothing against our domestic enemies. What is his legacy?
Well, I think the legacy is pretty clear. It's unilateral surrender in terms of protecting American democracy. By the way, not just against Russia, but conceivably against North Koreans, Iranians, Chinese, and others. We're not taking the steps we should. We're not fighting back. On gun control, we're not doing anything. And background checks are necessary but not sufficient. Other countries have mental illness at roughly equal levels of prevalence. So mental illness cannot be the only factor that's shaping American gun violence. Obviously, availability of certain weapons is part of it. His legacy will also be, I think, undermining the functioning of the Senate when it came to Supreme Court nominations. The Garland nomination, whatever you think about Garland versus Kavanaugh, the idea that the United States Senate would not act, for you're basically arbitrarily saying we interpret the Constitution to mean that a president can't appoint a Supreme Court justice in the last year and a half of his term. Where did that come from? Conservatives are meant to believe in process and institutions, and what we have are conservatives who no longer believe in processes or institutions. And just we'll get to it later, I expect, but the contrast between so-called conservatives in the United States and those in Britain is really on display. And we saw, I actually think, and we'll get to the story, but the difference between people who really embrace conservatism as opposed to, if you will, partyism, and the difference between both sides of the Atlantic right now is quite impressive.
It's now, Steve, it's Trumpism. It's not conservatism.
Right,
it's not
but I
partyism,
think
it's Trumpism.
To Richard's point, what happened in the UK was the equivalent of Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Chuck Grassley, and a whole bunch of senior Republicans basically saying, no mas, we're not going to do this anymore. So you have these 21 Tories in Britain, including the grandson of Winston Churchill, including two former equivalents of the Secretary of the Treasury here, basically breaking with the Prime Minister. And here you have a bunch of sheep who are following Donald Trump right off the cliff.
Right off the cliff.
And Susan Page, that's exactly what happened last night in Britain. You had 24 conservatives saying, Boris Johnson, we are not going to follow you off the cliff. And yet, time and again, we're seeing Republicans in Washington, D.C. just being silent, despite the fact 90% of Americans want them to pass 94% of Americans, I'm sorry, let me be exact, want to see them pass universal background checks.
And there is no issue on which congressional Republicans are more at odds with public opinion than the issue of some of these gun measures, including the measures that the House already has passed and sent to the Senate. I did think we saw a slightly different tone on the part of Senate Majority Leader McConnell yesterday, in that he was openly saying, we're going to do what Trump is willing to support. And if President Trump does not give us confidence that he'll actually support and then follow through and sign a gun measure, we're not going to bring it up. But he did indicate he'd bring it up at the White House if the White House went there first. That is not the traditional role of a co-equal branch of government, but it is the approach that this Republican-controlled Senate has taken with this president. Just one other point, but going back to Walmart, one thing that strikes me about Walmart's decision at this point and their previous decisions limiting some sales of guns and ammunition, this is not exactly Ben & Jerry's taking a political stance. This is a company that is the largest private employer in the United States, the biggest retailer in the United States, grounded in red America, in rural and conservative parts of our country, saying that they're willing to take these steps and calling on Congress to do that. That strikes me as important to note when you look at the elements of American society beyond the government saying enough is enough when it comes to this gun violence.
Yeah, no, it is pretty remarkable. And Richard, I mean, can you believe we'd get to a point where you'd have a Senate Majority Leader saying, I can't do anything unless the president allows me to do something, unless he gives me permission. Here, the man is granted
leader
by the Constitution of the United States and the people of this country all the power of Article 1, and yet he meekly says, I can't do